Good evening, everyone. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for joining us. This is WION, World is One News. Today is Tuesday, July the 11th. The time now is 9:30 in the morning in New York, 2:30 in London, 3:30 in Cape Town, and 7 p.m. here in New Delhi. Tonight, we have a special broadcast. Both topics focus on women empowerment. Our South Asia-focused story is about an island only for men in Japan that has now been declared as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Okunoshima allows up to 200 men every year to enter just once a year, but they have to strip down naked to get rid of their impurities. They can't take back any mementos, and they don't really say why women aren't allowed. But one theory is because they menstruate, and that is considered impure. We'll get to that story a little later on, but first, our world-focused story tonight revolves around world population. Why? Because today is World Population Day, July the 11th. We'll take a look at the pros, the cons, and which countries are in fact trying to grow their populations and how India compares with the rest of the world. All right, well, current models predict that the world's population is growing by about 83 million people every year. The United Nations works with agencies and programs to analyze world population and look at developmental issues. The UN also says even if fertility rates are down, the world's population will reach 9 billion by the year 2030 and nearly 10 billion in 2050 and 11 billion by the year 2100. Here's a report.
July the 11th is observed as World Population Day. It was first noted in 1987, 30 years back. The United Nations started to bring focus to the Day of 5 billion and address population issues around the globe in relation to the environment and development. More than 90 countries observed it in 1990. Here are some of the reasons it's observed. To protect and empower youth of both genders. Offer details about sexuality and delay marriages until one is ready. Educate youths to avoid unwanted pregnancies, empower people to remove gender stereotypes, educate people about pregnancy-related illnesses, raise awareness on dangers of early childbirth, provide information about STDs and how to avoid infections, demand for laws to protect girl-child rights, provide equal education access to boys and girls, give easy access to reproductive health services for couples. The United Nations also raises issues on this day about empowering people when it comes to family planning, especially in developing nations. Around 225 million women who want to avoid pregnancy are not using safe and effective family planning methods. This includes lack of access to information or lack of support from their partners. Most of these women are in the world's 69 poorest countries. The United Nations says voluntary family planning is a human right central to gender equality and women's empowerment. It is also a key factor in reducing poverty. In 2015, world leaders made a commitment to protect people, prosperity and the planet. Endorsed by 150 world leaders, there was a push to end poverty and discrimination. The United Nations Partnership Program wants every girl to get access to sexual and reproductive health services, to get an education, find decent work and contribute to her family and community. This year, World Population Day coincides with the Family Planning Summit, which wants to give over 120 million more women access to family planning by 2020. Bureau Report, WION.
So when the world's population goes up, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, as of today, the world's population stands at 7.5 billion people, and just today 235,000 people were born. Sadly, 97,000 people died. So a growth of about 138,000 people in just one single day. All right, let's put that in perspective over the whole course of a year. 73 million people are born every year. 30 million people die according to the latest report. So still a much larger percentage of births than deaths. So let's take a look at how India shapes up and compares to the rest of the world. Well, on many key issues, including urban versus rural population, the gender ratio, the child population, as well as age demographics. All right, first up, the urban versus the rural population. Well, that went from 72 to 69% in 2011. The urban population went from 28% all the way up to 31%. So it looks like people are shifting to the bigger cities, trying to get education, jobs, or a combination of the two. The world's urban population is at 52%, so still significantly higher than India's, but it also looks like the trend is shifting. So the urban versus the rural population in 2001 shifting. All right, the sex ratio was 933, our next comparison. So this is compared to every 1,000 men. All right, 933 women per 1,000 men back in 2001. Well, that's changed a decade later. Take a look, 943 for every 1,000. So it is going up. So the gender ratio is sort of bridging, getting a little bit closer. All right, let's talk about the next point, the child population, point number 3. So when it comes to the population of our young ones, there is a little bit of a decrease in the birth rate. Well, this could possibly be because of the government's family planning initiatives. There's about a 2.3% drop in the number of children under the age of 6 from 2001 all the way to 2011. Well, moving on with the child population, it also talks about the declining birth rate. There's been a decrease of about 6% in the number of children ages below 14 and under. So that is also going down. All right, what about the population when it comes to India's working class versus the rest of the population? Well, that's gone up, in fact, 58% in 2011 to 63% in 2011, 2001 to 2011. So 58% 2001, 63% in 2011. Now, this increase has a positive economy on the dependency ratio. The world's ratio right now stands at 66%. So what about our seniors, our older folks? Let's take a look. Better medical technology. This has helped increase life expectancy. Well, in India, the population of those above 60 has now gone up from about 6.9% to 8.3% in the course of a decade. So from 2001 to 2011, 6.9 to 8.3. The world's population for those who are older than 65 is at 7.7%. Let's talk about the dependency ratio. So what exactly does that mean? The dependency ratio measures the number of people that are dependent on the working population. Now that's 15 to 64. That's the age group when most people are considered that they can qualify to work. Dependents are either below the age of 14 or above the age of 65. So despite the increase in population over the age of 60, there has been a decrease in the population under the age of 14. Now, the number of people considered within the working bracket, ages 15 to 59, well, in the case of India, it's gone up, thus reducing the dependency ratio from 734 in 2001 to 596 to 2011. So certainly a good thing. And last but not least, the World Bank dependency ratio. According to the World Bank data, the dependency ratio was 60% in the year 2000. It's now gone down to 54% in 2011. India was at 64% back in 2000, going down to 55% in 2011. So what do we do with all these numbers? A lot of number crunching, perspective, India versus the world. Let's bring in our guest to get some perspective on this. We have Poonam Mutreja, the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India, joining us live to get perspective. Thank you so much. We appreciate your insights. You know, people often say, a higher population is a liability, but we've also seen some positives to it, the positive angle. Give us your thoughts on it, some of the positive perspectives to a growing population. Poonam?
So, in India, we have a situation where we have a very large young population, and the young population could be a huge asset in the country like Ireland, invested in the demographic dividend, but the demographic dividend opportunity is very small. So unless we invest in young people in India, their jobs, skill development, and so on, we are not going, it can become a demographic disaster. So we have a small window of opportunity, and I think if we invest in the young people, it could be a win-win situation for India.
All right, Poonam.
But I'm not sure we are onto it.
Right.
And in terms of your question about is population an asset, population must be converted into an asset. And we have every opportunity to do that. But we haven't planned in India. We haven't planned for education, health, any infrastructure. So just to blame the population may not be the right way to analyze the situation.
Poonam, a quick follow-up with regards to that. What about the economic impacts? You talked about infrastructure, but countries like India, where the child mortality rate has gone down, the age of seniors has now gone up, so people are living longer. Now, can we attribute all of this to better food, better hospital care, and perhaps better technology? Is India developing?
Yes, India is developing, and India has made huge investment in child mortality and maternal mortality to prevent that. So therefore, if the answer from that question to that question is that if you invest in infrastructure and have political commitment like we did to MDG 4 and 5, which is child mortality and maternal mortality, we will succeed. So we invest in family planning and people have access to quality planning, family planning services, and women are educated. India's fertility will continue to go down as it is going down in many parts of the country. So finally, I'd like to say if we invest in family planning, we will be able to stabilize India's population.
All right, we'll come back to you, Poonam, in just a second. But if you are wondering about the world population over the next few decades, well, let's break it down. Here's the latest model. 8.6 billion people on planet Earth by the year 2030. 9.8 billion people by 2050. And get this, 11.2 billion people by the year 2100, by the end of the century. Quite a lot of people on planet Earth. Well, here are the top 10 countries in terms of world population right now as it stands. Well, China and India fight closely for the first 2 spots, trying to grab it neck and neck, and more than 1.3 billion people, quite a lot of people as we know. U.S. is in the number 3 spot with 326 million people. Ranking in the top 5, Indonesia and Brazil. In the top 10, we have Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, and Mexico. So these are the most populous countries around the world. All right, so we've talked about this. Right now, the world's 7 billion or so. What exactly do they do? Let's break it down. A little bit of a perspective for you. 1.9 billion people, well, they're just too young. 1.9 billion people, too young to work. So they're the baby boomers getting ready to get into the workforce. 1.7 billion people work in services. 1.4 billion people, they work in agriculture. We have 800 million people who are in industrial jobs. 577 million people who are older than 64. So we're assuming they're either retired or out of the workforce, perhaps traveling the world. We have 430 million people who are unemployed and more than 400 million others who make up the 7.5 billion or so. Well, they are entrepreneurs. All right, so let's now talk about this, the pros and the cons when it comes to the world population growth, the advantages, the disadvantages, and which countries are trying to grow their population and which ones are actually trying to cut it. Here's a report. What the world's population, if we kind of break it down, this is what everybody kind of does. The 7 billion or so people. Let's put this into a visual context. 1.9 billion people. Some of them are too young to work. There's about 1.7 billion people who work in services. There's another 1.4 billion in the field of agriculture. 800 million who are in industrial jobs. 577 million are older than 64. Again, as we said, likely retired. 430 million are unemployed, and more than 400 million are entrepreneurs. All right, let me go back to Poonam standing by. Poonam, let's talk about this when it comes to the world's population. There are some countries in Europe, specifically Denmark, Germany, Russia. Many of these are, in fact, trying to give incentives to people, believe it or not, giving incentives to have children, to grow the population. Could India, China, and some of these other countries perhaps learn a lesson or two? What do you think?
So, fertility is declining in India and China too. And we will reach a stage where we will have minus growth rates, as we do have in several parts of India. So I think we have to have a balanced approach. And for those countries that are trying to give incentives to families to have more children, I think migration is the way to go, and people have the right to decide how many children they have. I'm totally against incentives and disincentives, and an equilibrium will be reached in terms of migration. So I don't see why any woman or man who does not wish to have additional children should be incentivized or disincentivized to have children. So I am someone who doesn't subscribe to this at all.
But let me also ask you another important element of all of this is the advantages and disadvantages. Certainly the disadvantages are on your screen: famine, living standards, overcrowding, affecting the environment, certainly job stress. The more people you have, more people competing. But, sort of the bigger human perspective of all of this, bring it back, women empowerment. In some of these underdeveloped countries, there's not access to health care, perhaps not enough awareness about family planning and unwanted pregnancies. So a lot of the times, the reports that we were reading say that people keep trying to have more and more children, thus increasing the population. So how important is that? Gender equality, women empowerment, educating people about family planning. What do you think?
I always have said that education is the best family planning pill. It's the best contraceptive, and it's been said by others too. So educating women, investing in women's empowerment where they have agency to exercise the right to decide how many children they have is going to decrease the population substantively and stabilize population in a country like India, where women, the 18% of the fertility is unwanted. Why should, and the number turns out to be huge. You've been giving statistics, try the statistic for unwanted fertility in India. Second, even the wanted fertility, the population demographic, it really comes from 70% of the population that is young. And if we educated our girls and married them late and they spaced their children, population stabilization will happen very drastically. But if we don't do that, we are going to continue to have unwanted, ill-timed children too early, too quickly, too many. So I absolutely agree with you. We need to invest in education and women's empowerment and access to family planning. Absolutely. Those are the best strategies for not just population stabilization, but for women's empowerment, a good goal for us to have in itself.
All right, and really quickly, as we sort of wrap all of these things up, as we wrap up World Population Day, your thoughts on perhaps moving forward, whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's some of the other countries around the world, the importance of observing days like World Population Day. Is it just another day, or could there be something more tangible that's actually accomplished? The equality between boys and girls, educating, the awareness, perhaps understanding in the long term how to better utilize the population. Your closing comments.
My closing comment starts with what you just said. We need greater involvement of men. We need to engage men and take responsibility in being responsible where it comes to sexuality, where it comes to family planning for women, where it comes to changing social norms, where men are more supportive of women and they do not leave the burden of having children on women and they have the pleasure of having sex. I also strongly believe that World Population Day has become much more than just a symbol. It is a time when countries are sitting here in London at the London Summit where I am making commitments. They're making financial commitments. They're making commitments to empower women. We're looking at family planning in a rights-based approach, a women's empowerment approach. So I think this is the best thing that could have happened to the family planning movement, that there is a day when nations are getting together and making commitments.